I just want to introduce the chair of this panel, Irena Grudzinska-Gross, who is a very important author of quite a number of very important books, including one on Czesław Milosz Brodsky and Venclava, bridging the three traditions and cultures. But this is just the very, very surface of what Irena has done. So she will be chairing, and as the organizer of this conference, I'm sorry to say, but we will not have the third panelist today, unfortunately. So we will have a bit more time for questions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very sorry to say that Poland is a little bit less popular than, or maybe it's the afternoon that people have other things to do. But I'm very grateful for everybody who is here, and I'm especially grateful to be presiding over such a wonderful meeting. We have here two speakers. We are going to have a reverse order of speaking, so I'm going to introduce the first one, who is second in our program, and this is Ilaria Sicari, who is postdoctoral currently, because she's usually in University Foscari of Venice, but currently she's a postdoctoral research fellow at Stanford University, and her research is devoted to Tamizdat as an alternative transnational publishing practice. And she will talk today about, I'm going to read your title. She's going to talk today about transnational networks of Polish Tamizdat. And this is the beginning of our panel, and then we are going to have second speaker who is going to develop some of the parts of it.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Józef, for organizing this conference. Today I will present one part of my actual research, which is devoted more broadly on the transnationalization of Tamizdat, but today I will focus on the Polish Tamizdat. Oh, okay. I hope that the connection, it works well here. One of the most intense battles of the Cold War was that for gaining hearts and minds. As it is known, the ideological struggle between the two blocs was primarily fought on the battlefield of cultural production, and the weapons massively employed in the fight were books. The aim of my actual research is to map the topography of culture during the Cold War through the analysis of the production, circulation, and reception across and beyond the Iron Curtain of non-official Soviet and Eastern European manuscripts, Tamizdat, and books, Tamizdat. The framework of my research is that of a relatively new cultural turn in the field of historical studies devoted to Cold War studies, which is focusing on cooperation instead opposition. And here we have quotation, because there are too many concepts which are important in my research. One is that of nylon curtain, a concept of Georgi Peteri, which demonstrated that the curtain was made of nylon, not iron, because he stated the high permeability of the curtain to cultural objects, and also the idea that under the shallow surface of bipolar juxtapositions, there was a wide space of vivid interaction and uncontrolled interactive space. There is also another concept which is that of multipolarity instead of bipolarity. And it is in that context that I'm working on transnational and multinational cooperation. Because the sphere of interaction was a multilateral space by nature, because it was uncontrolled by the superpowers and was not subject to the bipolar laws of Cold War. And also, I'm focusing on the role of small actors instead of superpowers. And with small actors, I mean smaller states as actors in their own right, but also the idea that the interaction of non-state actors had an ultimately decisive influence not only on the state actors, but also on the bipolar juxtaposition. And in this perspective, I'm focusing on the agency of socio-cultural actors, individuals and institutions. So, for example, publishing houses or translators, editors, and also different organizations. In this framework, Tamizdat highlights cooperation across apparent ideological division and cross-border interaction instead of hostility, and the emphasis on smaller transnational actors instead of governments demonstrates the crucial role of book diplomacy in preventing the cultural isolation of the two blocs and fostering the circulation of knowledge and idea during the Cold War. And in fact, Bourdieu asserted that to fully understand the value of a literary work, it must be placed in a system of social relations that determine not only its meaning, but also its position within a cultural field and more widely within the field of power. And in order to determine not only the material production of cultural goods, but also their symbolic production, as the production of their meaning and value, their legitimation and recognition as cultural goods, and so on. So for depicting the topography of Cold War culture, I'm taking into consideration a new asset of the cultural interactions between the two blocs, which were decentralized, multipolar, transnational, and multidirectional. And by giving more emphasis to the agency of all the social cultural actors, we took part to the transnational socialization and negotiation of Samizdat and Tamizdat, and by assessing their position within the field of cultural production and the field of power in order, before to go on, I would like that to say that this perspective on the social dimension of this cultural process and cultural production, I would like also to remind the idea of Tamizdat as cultural resistance and collective memory, which uniting individuals of a disjointed, atomized population into a conscious society, which is a quotation of the same Irena. But how I'm doing that? My aim is to mapping the roots and mapping the networks of Tamizdat. So mapping the roots, what I mean? I mean that I'm trying to reconstruct the editorial microhistory of this text by recollecting data in the archival collection of several Western publishing houses, like, for example, Imka Press, Passiev, Institut Literacki, Atheneum, Harper & Row, and as well as literary journals and magazines like Kultura, Continent, Grani, and Tempo Presente also. But why I'm focusing on this particular publishing houses and journals, because they are more or less deliberately and with a higher or lesser degree of awareness took part in the secret book distribution program of Radio Liberty and Radio Free Europe, financed by the Free Europe Committee, and the International Advisory Council in order to assess who smuggled the manuscripts, for example, who edited and translated them, where and when they circulating, and how the copyright issues were managed, and so on. But for mapping the networks of relations among socio-cultural actors, I'm recollecting data in the archival collection of individuals and institutions whose agency was determinant in the production, circulation, and reception of Tamizdat, and consequently had a great impact also on the effectiveness of the secret book distribution programs, with the aim of assess also in that case their function as, for example, how their action contributed, the agency contributed to the legitimation of Tamizdat as a cultural object, their position with the cultural field and in turn with the field of power, and their role in fostering the creation of the Cold War culture. And from this microhistorical perspective, so I mean the microhistory of publication and the individual collective microhistory, it will be possible to highlight the role of small actors as a gatekeeper, focusing on their habitus, political and religious beliefs, aims and motivations, and to downsides the role of superpowers in the production and circulation of these objects. Okay, today I will illustrate the socialization of Polish Tamizdat, and before I want to introduce that, I've used primary sources, and I don't know if it is visible. I'll try to do that. Okay, no. Technology. But well, there are several archives that I have already checked. For example, all'Archivio Storico delle Arti Contemporanee, I worked on the Biennale collection related with the Biennale of Dissent, the so-called Biennale of Dissent, at the Hoover Institution archives on the Radio Liberty and Radio Free Europe records and the Leopold Wabensch papers, but also at the Oz archives I worked on the collection of Radio Liberty and Alfred Reich, which wrote also a book on the topic. While in creating my data set, I'm used secondary sources like memories, oral histories, interviews, books, and other databases. For illustrate the socialization of Polish Tamizdat today, I want to briefly illustrate the agency of Instytut Literacki and Kultura in the production and diffusion of Polish Tamizdat, focusing on the agency of one of its founders, the book diplomat Gustav Yerling Gruzinski. Instytut Literacki was founded in Rome by Jerzy Giedroyć and was established the emigre Polish house Casa Editrice Le Lettere, which was after became the Instytut Literacki, which in 1947 moved to Paris. In 1947, before to move to Paris, Giedroyć and Erling Gruzinski, they founded the journal Kultura, which published in Italy 24 books and one number of Kultura. And well, here, for example, I selected some publication of Instytut Literacki, which were financed by the Free Europe Committee. like, for example, George Orwell, the translation of George Orwell in 1956, Milorad Giles, Pasternak, Siniavski, and several. So we have a selection of translations of books written by Western authors, which were banned in the Eastern Bloc, and also some books written in Poland but banned there and then published abroad, but also books published abroad from emigre authors. In order to have an idea of the agency of Institut Literacki, here we have a letter from the Free Europe Committee, where it's possible to see that the Free Europe Committee financed the publication of Dr. Żywago with the idea to distribute the text in Polish language during the Youth Festival, the Austrian Youth Festival in 1959. Or, sorry. No, sorry. Because, oh no. Sorry, I'm very sad about that. But let's try. Okay. Because it's another computer, okay, it is. And here we have a letter to Giedrich, when again it stated the idea to publish the Dr. Żywago in order to distribute these copies among Polish immigrants, and the latest. And this one also is a report, is a annual Free Europe Committee report about the book published in 1967 by Institut Literacki with the sponsorship of Free Europe Committee. And here we have again Dr. Żywago in Polish and one book of George Fleming. What demonstrates this correspondence? That since the first moment that the secret book distribution program was created, Institut Literacki took part in this program, and even if it is clear that in that case, also if we're focusing on also which kind of books were published, it is clear that there is like selection of anti-communist books, but also when we talk about anti-communism, we should know that it is a label, but when we focusing on the agency of each individuals and institution, we realized that each of them have different motivations and strategies and different aims. So talking about anti-communism, sometimes it's a way to flatten the discussion, but these close readings helps us to have overall perspective on the path that each actors create in this anti-communist struggle. Well, and here we have focusing on the agency of Erling Grudzinski, which, as I told, was the founder of the journal Kultura. And after the move of Institute to Paris, Erling Grudzinski interrupted this collaboration, which started again in 1955, when he came back in Italy and married Lidia Croce, which was the daughter of Benedetto Croce. And also this connection is very significant also in the circulation of this Tamizdat. And here I selected correspondence between Erling Grudzinski and Domenico Porzio, which was one of the editors of the publishing house Mondadori in Milan. And in this correspondence, Grudzinski is asking for the copyrights of Solzhenitsyn, the first circle. I think that was the first circle. And it demonstrates that he had great connections with the intellectuals in Italy. Because, for example, he also, in that occasion, he remembered to Porzio that, which you will certainly remember from the not so distant times when collaborating with you, I sent Terzignowski's writing to Rizzoli, because before to move to Mondadori, Domenico Porzio was working to the publishing house Rizzoli. So they had already a way to cooperate. And he also stated that we cannot pay anything for the simple reason that the Polish edition of Solzhenitsyn novel would be largely sent to Poland for free. Because in fact, Kultura Instytut Literacki, they cooperate to the two different secret book distribution programs. One was the mailing program, which was the idea was that of send by mail these books. And the other was the person-to-person program. And the person-to-person program had an organization also based in Italy, in Rome, because Rome was the perfect place to distribute these books, because a lot of people from Eastern Europe come to Rome, and in the city they found these books for free. But what is also interesting for me is the answer. So the note that Domenico Porzio wrote to the general editor of Mondadori, and he wrote, Erling is a Polish emigre, survived to Nazi camps. This is an error because he survived two gulags, but married with Benedetto Croce's daughter. He is a close friend of Silone, and he is a collaborator of the magazine Tempo Presente. And also the reference to Tempo Presente is not a casualty, because Tempo Presente was financed by the Congress for Cultural Freedom, so he had also connection in that sense. He is a man of great moral qualities and fights to clandestinely spread in Poland banned writings and novels. His request is legitimate, and I take the liberty of supporting it with you and with the president, Giorgio Mondadori at the time. So this is just to give you an idea of the works that I'm doing, but recollecting this material, I'm creating a data set with the idea to create a digital visualization of my data. And so today I would like to present you the Polish galaxy. This is just a small part of the work that I'm doing, but for example, here, and this is also for introducing the work of Monika. Here we can see that, for example, this story started with the general Władysław Anders, because all the characters of this story, which are Łabędź, Erling Grudzinski, and Czapski, and also Giedroyć, they were part of the Second Corps of the Polish arms, and they met in that occasion. They fight the Battle of Monte Cassino in Italy, and after the war, they live in Italy. They stay in Italy, and for that reason, they founded Institut Literacki in Rome. But for example, in the case also of Grudzinski, let me see if it works. Okay. So it's clear that, for example, he had connection with Radio Free Europe because when he was in London, he also cooperated with Radio Free Europe. But as I told you before, through the contacts that he had with Ignazio Silone, he had also contact with the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And for sure with Leopold Łabędź, which was one of the key persons of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. In the case of Łabędź, I'm working at the moment on the Hoover archives, focusing on the correspondence that Łabędź had with Zbigniew Brzezinski. Because in that case, for example, if I found him, where is it? Łabędź, yes, so a moment, because, no, okay. Oh, yes. And here, through the friendship with Brzezinski, he had connection with Jimmy Carter. And in fact, working on this correspondence, it is clear that the idea to using the claims for defending the human rights in the Eastern countries started from Łabędź, which suggested to Brzezinski to explain to Jimmy Carter how it is important in order to avoid the frontal confrontation and opposition with the Soviets. But another interesting, the last, I think, I don't know how many times I have, but I can talk for whatever you want. But for example, for which concern the Biennale of Dissent, for example, Łabędź was contacted probably directly by Carlo Ripa di Meana, because he was also, Łabędź, I mean, in contact with Bettino Craxi. Bettino Craxi and Ripa di Meana was a socialist too, and that here in 1977, the year of the Biennale of Dissent, he was also the president of the Biennale. So Ripa di Meana decided to devote this Biennale to the dissent, and Łabędź was very, very happy to help them, because he realized that it was a very, very important exhibition which had a world resonance. And so Łabędź helped in the context, so in creating contacts between Carlo Ripa di Meana with Peter Dornan, which was the director of the Tamizdat session of the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And in that way, he helped to build up an exhibition devoted to Tamizdat, and Magnitizdat. And it is also interesting because this year at La Biennale, I don't remember in which pavilion, it is a national pavilion, but I didn't went there, but I heard about it. In one national pavilion, there is an exhibition devoted to Magnitizdat, so to the Musica na Kastiach. Well, this is the preview for your eyes only, because it is a work in progress.
Yes, so I'm introducing our second speaker, Monika Zaleska, who is a Ph.D. candidate at CUNY Graduate Center, writing her dissertation on Polish writer and artist Józef Czapski. She has taught literature and creative writing at Brooklyn College and Hunter College, and is also a fiction writer, a freelance translator from Polish, and an editor at Newest New York and Brooklyn Review. And Monika is going to talk, in fact, about Józef Czapski and his struggle for Kultura. So she will just talk about one person among the people that were mentioned by Ilaria Sicari.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for being here today, Yasha for organizing, Irena for heading up our panel. As she told you, I'm going to speak about Józef Czapski today, who is one of the people involved with Kultura and also Instytut Literacki. I actually brought you, in the spirit of Tamizdat project being about material culture, I brought you some copies from my collection. Let me introduce Czapski briefly for those of you who may not be familiar with him. There he is. Hopefully you can see him on the screen. He was a Polish painter and writer, critic of art and literature, very interested in the work of Proust. I'm actually writing about Proust and Czapski in my dissertation, kind of the connections there and the influence of Proust on Czapski's thinking about painting and writing. Like Ilaria said, he was also very involved with Kultura from the beginning, when it started publishing in 1947, and of course Kultura the magazine ran to 2000, which is a little over a decade after Poland became a free democratic country, so it really has a very long and strong tradition in Polish literature and culture, and the magazine Kultura and the Instytut Literacki, which published many of Czapski's works, are kind of like twin organizations, or Kultura is maybe part of the publishing house. I don't know how you would formulate it. Maybe we can talk about that, but I'll kind of be talking about them both. Of course, established in Italy and Rome after World War II, and then moving to the suburbs of Paris afterward. A lot of these general points have been covered, so I'm not going to go through all of them. But he was really a central figure, Czapski, especially in the early years of Kultura. He was in the Second Polish Corps with the others that she talked about. And he wrote about his experiences during the war. He was a Soviet prisoner in 1940-41. He was a survivor of the Katyn massacre, and he wrote about his time in Russia, in the army, and also essays on literature and culture throughout his time working with Kultura. And also his books were published by Instytut Literacki, including a book I'm going to be working with today, Tumult in Widma, so collections of his essays as well. What I'm going to be focusing on today is Czapski's trip to New York, to the United States, actually in 1949-50, which was a fundraising trip for Kultura. Basically, Giedroyć said to him, I want you to go take this trip and collect donations and create awareness for Kultura. So that's kind of what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Unlike the presentation before, mine is like a very small narrative journey through one person working with Kultura, but I was so inspired by what you shared and by the use of technology too. It's fascinating. So I'll start there, okay? So I'll start with an anecdote. So on a rainy night in 1950, a surprised Czapski ran into the Polish poet Jan Lechon not too far from here on Madison Avenue. Lechon was dressed in a long black coat with an upturned collar in Czapski's description, and he says to Czapski, What are you doing this Kultura stuff for? Drop it. I once dealt in such matters and I had to have 7 meters of intestine cut out. Okay, but so the struggles of working with such organizations, right? However, obviously Czapski did not drop this struggle. He actually was instrumental in rehousing the institute when it needed to, and he undertook actually 2 different fundraising tours for Kultura, North America in 49-50, and then South America in 1955. And as I kind of propose here, to talk about his struggle for Kultura is to think about the material fight for these kind of extraterritorial publishing projects, the difficulty of circulating these works in Poland. I'll talk briefly about that on Czapski's kind of personal level, and also kind of just gaining awareness and support in diasporic Polish communities for the project. And also some of his own personal feelings. He was very personally involved with everyone related to Kultura and the project. So here is some of the people associated with Kultura in front of the house. I think their first house, yes. As you might gather from, this kind of anecdote with Lechon and his intestines, being part of such a publishing venture meant financial struggle, insecurity, problems of distribution, even problems of housing. Kultura actually had to move, even from kind of Paris to 2 different houses in the suburbs. And also, in a really unique way, all the people who were central to Kultura were also living together in the house. So that was Giedroyć, Sofia, and Zygmunt Herz, and Czapski. They were all living and working together always, but in the early years especially, it was a very tight-knit group. And it was first funded by a loan, and then through subscriptions, donations, and some of the networks you mentioned. So it was Giedroyć's idea, as I mentioned, that Czapski kind of mobilized the Polish diaspora to help fund Kultura. He was really interested in, kind of spreading the word, but also gaining financial support for the magazine and the publisher. So what was Czapski doing in the US? Well, this is him in New York. And he was often speaking about his experiences as a Soviet prisoner of war, as well as a military investigation he conducted into the over 20,000 Polish officers who went missing during the time of his imprisonment, and it would later be found out that they had been executed by shooting in what is now known as the Katyn massacre by order of Stalin. So Czapski was writing and speaking on Katyn, and this was one of the main reasons he couldn't expect to return to Poland after the war, and I don't think he wanted to either. But talk of Katyn was censored in Poland, and it wouldn't even be admitted that the Soviets had anything to do with it until 1989. And even in the US, he was actually told when he spoke on the radio not to mention by name Katyn. Though he would later give his testimony to a US House of Representatives committee investigation on Katyn. So he was speaking a lot about this, he for some reason was not, killed, so he was speaking on behalf of kind of all the colleagues that he had lost at the time. And how was this story received in the US? Thinking about, censorship, the relation with the Soviet Union at the time. So when he was speaking to average Polish Americans or Americans, he was kind of met with some disbelief, but also these more private inquiries into if he knew anything about certain people's loved ones. So this is a quote from his essay, which was published in Kultura in 1950. He's reflecting on his time in the camps, and then 10 years later on this speaking tour in the US. So this is what he says. Could I imagine in Pawliwczew Bór camp, where we were kept for a month on the road from Starobielsk to the Grazowiec camp, that almost 10 years later I would be traveling across America and talking about Katyn? That Americans listening to me carefully will say, I see, I see. At every event, there will be those that look at me with eyes filled with dark distrust and ask, Sir, do you really think the Soviets did it? that I will speak to thousands of Poles from Ottawa to Toronto, from Buffalo to Philadelphia, and there won't be one place where after my talk, a man or woman comes up to me and shyly asks about this or that surname, about a brother, friend, husband, or son. Did you see him, sir? Maybe you can try to remember. You had to know him. And always the same phrase, which told me everything I need to know. We last had word in April of 1940. Of course, after that, many people were lost. He doesn't reproduce in his essay really too much of the content of his talks, but for sure they were based on the two memoirs he wrote in the 40s, Memories of Starobielsk and Inhuman Land, which recounted these experiences in the Soviet Union. However, he also faced some, political difficulties in France for writing about these matters. There was a whole set of French intellectuals, including Sartre, who, as Czapski's biographer puts it, quote, clung to their adamantly Stalinist bias. They weren't really open to hearing about this. And that's part of the reason why Czapski's accounts were published by Instytut Literacki and by Kultura. It's also in a 1948 issue of Kultura that he published the text of his very well-known lectures on Proust from a Soviet prison camp. When Czapski was a prisoner, he was lecturing from memory on Marcel Proust in Search of Lost Time. As you can see from my quotation I shared with you, even in the US, he was facing some skepticism, but he also faced a lot of positive support from American Poles. He recounts in a clip from an Agnieszka Holland and Andrzej Wolski film about Kultura that there were these 3 Polish-American men who wanted to offer him $300, and they said, no, it's not for Kultura, it's for you, it's for your story. But he says also that even poorer people would give money to the cause, saying, quote, I think it was a psychological moment where really wherever Poland still existed and lived, it vibrated. Those are Czapski's words. But I actually think a lot of that energy came from him. He was a very well-connected person from an aristocratic family with lots of social connections. He knew Charles de Gaulle. He knew all sorts of people across Europe. He was able to secure for Kultura a place to live and publish in complete freedom. He was able to secure funding from various, kind of upper-class people and cultured people, musicians and the sort who would give, fundraising events for Kultura. And also, of course, he went on this Pan-American tour. And Czapski had a history of doing such work. When he was a painter in the 1920s in Paris, he was in charge of collecting funding for the kind of group of painters, the Kapists who came from Poland to study French painting. He actually even threw a fundraising ball that he managed to get Picasso to help host, as long with his cousin, who is Princess Dali Radziwiłł. So you can see what kind of connections he had. And his biographer writes that even in this time, for the Kapist group, Czapski was their, quote, chief salesman and public relations officer. So that was a role he was really well suited to and good at. He also, in the 1930s, played a similar role for Głos Plastyków, another magazine. And it is in thinking about these kind of former roles he had, especially in the 30s, that he writes that he, quote, decided to fight for Kultura, that he wasn't going to give up, even though they were really hurting for money in the late 40s. And Kotyelensky, writing about Czapski, calls him the, quote, magazine's Minister of Foreign Affairs. But I want to say in this talk and what I'm sharing with you today, I'm really focusing on the very early years of Kultura and Czapski's role in its formation and funding. Later, as time went on, he would really withdraw from working so intensively for Kultura because he really wanted to return to his life as a painter. However, he was still living in the Maison Kultura, and this sometimes caused some tension because they were all kind of, not only were they sharing funding for the project, they were sharing funding for like the food on the table and living expenses. So he was kind of trying to withdraw from the organization while still being a roommate of sorts. What I think is also interesting in these earlier moments in the late 40s is for Czapski, it wasn't always clear to him what he could and what would or would not be censored when Kultura, for example, traveled back to Poland. So I wanted to share some moments from his correspondence with his friend and one-time partner, Ludwig Hering. In 1947, October 10th, he writes to Hering, who's living in Warsaw, "Write and tell me if I can risk sending you books, or at least magazines. I'll send an edition of Kultura, or maybe it's forbidden." In 1948, in April, Hering confirms the receipt of 2 packages, each with issues of Kultura, along with books, foodstuffs, and cigarettes. However, it's unclear from these letters why he was able to receive them, or if they just kind of passed through, or what the situation was. And then later, in April 27th of 48, Czapski writes that he had told someone to send Hering only an excerpt of Kultura, maybe slipped between something else, quote, so it gets there more easily. So there's definitely concerns about censorship. It's just not clear from Czapski's perspective what exactly is going on. Of course, as time went on, Instytut Literacki became very well established as a publisher of Polish Tamizdat, like you were discussing. Even writers who were still living in Poland and who would not be able to publish in Poland were publishing there, and younger writers were also publishing, though sometimes under pseudonyms. And Jelensky, in this essay that I'm quoting you from, talks about how in a 1972 issue of Kultura, there's an article saying that people in Poland are saying that people are saying that Poland doesn't really need Samizdat because they have this Tamizdat, this very strong Parisian base for publication. However, in this kind of back and forth, the magazine editorial staff kind of replies that no, we still do need Samizdat. We, quote, stand behind the backs of local publishers, and not only are we trying to support intellectual life, but at this point also facilitate contact with then striking workers, because of course the 70s were a time of unrest. So to return a little bit to Czapski and his contributions, in another 1952 essay, he recounts the same anecdote that I talk about from the film when these 3 Polish-American men want to give him money. And he talks about the difficulty of getting support for cultural projects. People are very willing to give money to like personal causes or on behalf of his personal story, but not necessarily to Kultura. So this kind of sways his confidence for some time, but not for long, because he's really very full of energy. And many people in the US, the Legion of Young Poles in Chicago, Polish Radio in Detroit, donated enough to publish several issues of the magazine. But Czapski also talks about not only the writers of Kultura needing support, but because he was part of the editorial team there, he writes about the publishing team kind of needing to know that their work is supported by this Polish diaspora. So again, this is kind of a maybe more personal look at the inner workings of Kultura, but this is what Czapski has to say. He says, "The editorial team, especially in our condition of emigration, beset with wild difficulties, making corrections for hours until the late night, packing, tying, and lugging on our backs hundreds of packages of our writings, and sending them to 53 countries, from New Zealand to Baghdad, from Chile to Chicago, Detroit to Montreal, and above all to our country. This editorial team needs to know that not only the words are read, but there are in this world people ready to sacrifice what they have to help us in our work." As we can see from his reflections across these essays, it was a material struggle, but it was also sometimes an actual physical struggle of packing. They were doing all this physical work to make the publishing house happen themselves, packing and sending editions. And of course, there's a huge emotional investment, as you can see, and there's a feeling of needing that kind of support from the outside for their project. The last thing I'm going to just draw our attention to here is, he doesn't say to Poland, he says to our country. I put in the our, but to our kraj, or our country. And I think this is something Jelensky also talks about his essay, the kind of atomization of Polish culture that's happening at this time. especially in the very early years after the war. There's a government in exile in London, there's a Warsaw government that's kind of installed by the Soviets, and there's a real fragmentation of culture from country. So he doesn't say Poland, he said back in the country, because I think he sees Poland, as from, you saw in his earlier quote, as kind of existing, as a kind of a larger idea. So his work at Kultura was kind of attempting to bring the culture and country back together. And I think on these trips especially, he was trying to include in that idea of Poland the diaspora and Polish Americans and Polish immigrants to other countries as well. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you, that I think there was kind of a new understanding of what Poland was or would become, and a lot of that had to do with this kind of Tamizdat cultural production. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We had two very different presentations. One in what we have to call digital humanities, and another one with humanities to court, yes? But it is very interesting. I have maybe, before we go on, I have two questions. There is one to Ilaria. If you are showing these connections, these acquaintances that you are showing, are these acquaintances all linked to the actual activity of this? So the person, if you say that Łabędź was the one who mentioned to Brzeziński human rights, and then Brzeziński mentioned human rights to Jimmy Carter. Is this factual knowledge, or is this some kind of a conclusion that you have from the fact that they knew each other?
Thanks for this question, because I'm still working on this correspondence, so I don't have the answer, but working on this digital visualization, it helps me to understand something that sometimes we cannot if we're processing with our own brain all the info that we have. So using these digital tools is a way to processing big data, but even if these are not big data, but in any case, there are a lot of data. And at the moment, working on the correspondence between Łabędź and Brzeziński, I have the letters that Łabędź sent to Brzeziński when he stated the importance on focusing on this human rights policy, as to say, this strategy to fight the communism using the human rights issues. But for which concern the networking, so the digital visualization of networking, in my project I'm also working on the archive of these letters. So what I want to do is to create a repository of these letters, not a digital repository, but to using it as a source. So in putting all the information about the single letters. So when the user have this map, he can also check where this letter is deposited. So it's also an instrument of research for others. So in that way, you can go by yourself to check the correspondence that you want to read.
Thank you. And to Monika, I would like to ask you, you basically almost didn't mention one thing, which is basically the most important, as far as I go, about Czapski, that is the fact that he's a painter. And that you did mention it, but how, my question is, how this was important for this activity, was it, because in the letters that I read of his, he's always, in his diary, he always complains that he's not painting, he's doing all these other things. And you presented him as this kind of jolly guy who is going around and fixing everything.
Yeah, I've given other talks where I talk about his complaints, so I guess I was focusing on the positive aspects. But yes, it was very important to him. It was a big point of conflict, I think, between him and Giedroyć, that he didn't want to do more of this work as time went on. And he really thought of himself as a painter. But it seems like he had, I think Eric Karpeles does a great job of talking about this in his biography. He really seems to have like 3 or 4 at least different hats that he can put on and really be like a cultural diplomat, a very sophisticated essayist and writer. One of his early essays in this period is about Bonnard, and then also a painter himself. So it was, yeah, I didn't focus on that at all, but it was extremely important to him. It actually caused him to kind of not abandon this work, but take a huge step back from it, because most of his work from before the war, his painting, was lost in Warsaw in the bombing. And so he basically had to start over from scratch in the 50s as a painter. And he was also kind of in the middle of his life at that point, and it was very important to him to return to that work. So also I think maybe I could mention, which wasn't really as strongly talked about here, but when he was in the US, he was visiting a lot of museums. He talks about that in these essays too, and he was spending a lot of time doing that. And I think one of his paintings, he was painting, drawing, but I think he had maybe a show or something during that time. So yeah, it was an ongoing activity also at the same time that he was doing this work.
And he's going to have now soon a very big exhibit in Paris, so in one of the museums, and so he's on his way. Watch out, he's on his way up as being rediscovered as a painter, or actually discovered as a painter.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. My question is, and I'm from my Jewish corner here. So the corner is first in this Tamizdat environment. How was it targeted for the Jewish readership? Because we know that during this period of time, especially before the Second World War, the bulk of Jews in Poland were products of Polish language education, yes. And then for some of them it was the only language even, or the main language. So how was it really in the readership, maybe even in the fundraising, yes? The second, among the authors. And the third, my question is, whether it would be legitimate or not to include in this entire network that it's so fascinating to see, also specifically Polish Jewish outlets, publications. Also, not necessarily maybe in the language in Polish. For example, in Buenos Aires, there was a publishing house specifically for Yiddish writers from Poland. They produced 100 volumes. In Israel also. And in general, after the Second World War, Jews from Poland, they dominated even we see in the American press that initially was almost exclusively Lithuanian, the Litvaks, yes. After the Second World War, it was predominantly in the hands of writers and journalists from Poland, of people from the circle of Isaac Bashevis Singer, who also was potentially, and I'm pretty sure that he was a reader of Polish stuff. So how do you think it is playing in all this? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question, which I take it as a suggestion, because unfortunately I still not yet focusing on Yiddish language production of Polish writers. So it would be for sure interesting to work on also on that production of Tamizdat, but yes, the work is very big, and I really hope to implement step by step the data set. So thank you for the suggestions.
I was also really inspired by what you were saying earlier about the Tamizdat located in Poland. I didn't know about that kind of world of Yiddish literature that was getting imported to the Soviet Union. In terms of Kultura, I really have been mostly focusing on Czapski, more so than like the networks. You can probably tell from my talk. It's very specific. So I can't really answer like the kind of global questions about it, but it's definitely something that I would like to learn more about, especially after kind of what you were contributing today. So,
I may, as an amateur, non-professional, so to say, reply that there are no numbers, but among the readers, the Kultura had a very steady subscribers list, about 5,000 people around the world, which was very, very important for the budget. And these were very, very faithful readers. And of course, there was no inquiry about their origin, but a very, very big part of that readership were Polish Jews. And in this phalanster, in the group that was working there, they may not have designed themselves in this way, but there was Giedroyć, who was from nobility, and there was Zofia and Zygmunt Herz, who were that generation of Jews educated in Polish schools and Polish language and considering themselves as Jews. Herling Grudzinski, though he did not, he opposed very much talking about it. He was from a Jewish family, and he was the first generation of people who went to Polish, so that the majority basically of the, and then there was Czapski, who was an aristocrat. So there was aristocracy in Jews as a typical alliance, strategic alliance in Polish culture. Definitely this has something to do. And if you read, there's a very extensive publication of Giedroyć correspondence. And in many places, and with very many writers, there's always a problem of how to write about the so-called Jewish question, how to address such this case and that case. It was a continuous problem. And Giedroyć did, for example, there's a very now published in English, a popular book by a writer, Andrzej Bobkowski, whose manuscript was, he's very popular. He's very popular in Poland. He's this kind of one of these kind of writers like Boy Scoutish, so to say, you know, very ironic, very always on bicycle, traveling among France during the Second World War. The manuscript of this book was extremely anti-Semitic. This was a guy who was writing that he was very, he was kind of maybe I'm extremely, maybe, I don't know, and for me extremely anti-Semitic. He was expressing satisfaction that kind of Jews are taken care of, something like that. And the Giedroyć cleaned out this from this book. So the book was very popular, is very popular in that version that doesn't have it. And there are various debates also when he's publishing various articles saying he writes to Wańkowicz in a certain moment that he doesn't want him to mention that Henryk Grudzinski was of Jewish origin, because he knew that Henryk Grudzinski doesn't want it and so on. So this is a, a book has not been written yet about it, but could be written about this issue.
What I wanted to ask you, you mentioned a tension between Jean-Paul Sartre and the Kultura milieu. And I wanted to ask you, I don't remember from Czapski's biography, I'm not very familiar with Czapski's life. Were there any connection with Albert Camus? Yes, and could you just address it? Because Albert Camus was very much one of the few, I think, among French, Parisian intellectuals actually interested in Eastern Europe.
Yes, absolutely. Czapski and him wrote to each other and discussed possible publication. I can't remember exactly what the outcome of that correspondence is, but I know that I see it in every book about Czapski now. There's the letter from Camus. So yeah, so they were in contact, and it was, I think, a much different, much more mutually warm relationship. I just can't remember what came of it, if any publication actually came of it, but it was a much different kind of relation, yeah.
May I ask something, add something to it? Yes, Camus was very much in relationship with Czapski. I know. I didn't read it about it, but I know about it also because Camus put in touch Czesław Miłosz with the mother of Simone Weil, but Miłosz learned about Simone Weil from Czapski. So this is this connection. But I would not put this. This is a very, very easy cliché to criticize Jean-Paul Sartre on all of these occasions. I am, I'm not, this is another topic that should be really researched. I just wanted to say that it's not true that they were not interested, Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre in Eastern Europe. For example, when there was a famous Kravchenko anti-communist trial, Simone Weil was there among the public all the time. And there were very many discussions about it in Temps Moderne. And therefore, I think that, so, this is 1949. Not Simone Weil, Simone de Beauvoir. Yeah, Simone de Beauvoir, that is the partner of Jean-Paul Sartre. So this is this cliché that Jean-Paul Sartre was completely hostile to all of this, but this is much more complicated, and I, since it's not my paper.
No, I would totally agree with you. I was kind of hinting at some, kind of tensions there, but not really developing. And I think you're absolutely right. It's more developed than that. But just to show that, coming into France, it wasn't always, you know, everyone wasn't always in agreement about like the whole project of Kultura and what they were doing there, and there were like tensions on the left about these questions.
No, there was a very big quarrel between Jean-Paul Sartre and Camus, and it was about the issue of terrorism and the issue of communism and also of the independence of Algeria and so on. I'm not denying it. This is but the fact that this kind of automatic assumption of hostility towards East European emigres, it's not true.
On this topic about the distribution of uncensored and banned literature, what would happen if you got caught?
I will answer because I know from experience. It depended on the moment. It changed the risk that you took when you were taking these books. Depended on when it was. So there were moments, especially up till 1953 or 54, which it was you could go to prison. Then later on, it was almost permitted for about 2 years, and then after that, it became again difficult, you know, you were caught. But very often the guys on the border, you know, they would confiscate it and sell it on the black market too. So you know, it was like all smuggling. It was a problem.
Just wanted to touch on, you know, this sort of networking and problem, and of course, you know, going back to, you know, like it's obviously the French intellectuals complicated, right? Especially before 56, right? After 56, on the Aryan Revolution, things change a little bit, but before 56, I think the French Communist Party and the French intellectuals were still believing in the Soviet Union. But I wonder more, you know, going back to sort of jumping on the U.S. side, I think that there's a, you know, in American studies, of course, there's like a sort of critique of U.S. power around the world, but I think what both of your papers prove is that, as you framed it, that there's a lot more agency on the side of Eastern Europe, right? That you know, this were not, you know, like it didn't come from Brzezinski or Carter or from the CIA, right? And so, but there is still the critique that the CIA funded some of these organizations, and I wonder, you know, like if your research sort of looked into that, and how do you respond to?
Today I talk about the fact that Free Europe Committee had these programs and that also the Congress for Cultural Freedom financed this publication. So it's a things that we know that they were sponsored by the CIA. But what I was told to you today is that even in this narration, when we're focusing on the agency of these small actors, also in the case of state small actors, because here we can say that, for example, the role of Polish immigrant was determinant in cooperating and made effective this book distribution program. So I think that this close reading became very clear the agency of these also individuals, which material smuggled, for example, the books, and it's a way also of rethinking the role of émigré communities in the creation of the Cold War culture, if we want to call it like that. So for sure, the general context is that of the Cold War. So I'm talking about the Cold War the cultural Cold War, but in any case, we are in the frame of the ideological confrontation. But what I want to demonstrate is that sometimes the idea of these two superpowers confronting is a way to flattening the question. So if we're focusing on small actors, we have a more dynamic and yes, a perspective which is more inclusive also.
Very much.
Thank you so much. You're the third person.